But I experienced workplace psychological abuse at the executive level, where toxic leadership, fraudulent behaviour from the CEO and other executives reporting to that person, as well as unrealistic workloads and a culture of intimidation, really created that toxic environment of constant fear, anxiety, and stress, not just for me, but also for a number of my staff members and colleagues as well. Um, it was really strange for me when this all started because I was, and this sounds very familiar when I talk to a lot of people experiencing workplace psychological abuse, but I was one of the few staff members to receive a performance-based bonus, and I was also a really high-performing leader. But I was subjected to bullying, intimidation, and gaslighting. Probably that was the worst thing for me from the CEO. But also exclusion from critical decision making that had a direct impact on my team and the division that I led at the time, which made it really increasingly challenging to perform my role optimally. And when we refer to psychological hazards, this workplace was absolutely full of them. And the CEO was well aware of them, but did absolutely nothing to address them. And an example of that is my division was chronically under-resourced, and for years I worked well over 12 hours a day, often working weekends, not eating till 2 o'clock in the afternoon for the first time. And many of my amazing staff worked those long hours too. But it was never enough. We're on that constant hamster wheel with increasing more and more pressure as the years sort of stretched on.
And
But the,
I was a school teacher for about 25 years. And my last half of my career, I started teaching at a brand new progressive school with inner city kids in Boston. And it was all brand new. We even built a brand new building and brand new curricula. I taught reading, writing, math, science. I ran the science department. I ran the fifth grade. I sometimes taught sixth grade whenever they needed me. I ran summer programs and after school programs and orientations and so many different things, and it was great. And we had a written protocol um, after many years. They wrote a protocol, and it basically was like how to behave at the job. You're not allowed to backstab. You have to go to a person, try to work it out. It was all laid out. If that doesn't work, then, this is what you do next, the next steps. And I followed all of that. um, and then they hired a woman. She was a mom of one of the teachers and founders. She was a donor. She was retired. And she started working there. And immediately, she wasn't following any protocols. From the very first meeting I was in with her, we had a gentleman run a math department meeting. He was a well-respected retired teacher, and he was doing this as a second career. He was fantastic. But um, after the meeting, she just came to me and she was so angry and it was so personal. It was very confusing. I'm like, we don't really do that here, but I don't know. I just listened to her and I didn't know how to react. And my boss kept asking me, how's it going with so and so? And I was honest with her. And she said we shouldn't have hired her. We knew it was going to be a problem. As a couple of years went on, I would meet with my boss every Friday and she would ask me, how's it going? And it was getting really hard. And I would tell her. And I got not only from the principal, but from one of the founders and the head of school. Um, and they were saying all sorts of horrible things about this woman. They were really none of my business, but it was, she's toxic. We shouldn't have hired her. Her adult children are all struggling with their mental health. We're going to escort her out of the building as soon as she teaches her classes. Oh, we're going to have a separate office from her. Finally, I can't take it anymore. And I'm like, there needs to be a change. I've been at this for 6 years now. I need to either be moved or look for another job. And they said, no, we're going to move her. And then when I went back to work in September, they didn't move her. They said that she was going to retire that year and she didn't want to be moved. And it was too late for me to get another job. So I'm like, oh, I got to hang in here for one more year. I couldn't hang in. I left on a sick leave about halfway through. She ramped it up so bad. She's still there. She never retired.
So
So,
I was given a promotion at a company I absolutely loved and adored, coming out to the other side of the pandemic. And I was really excited for this promotion. This boss seemingly took me under their wing. I say seemingly because I quickly figured out it was under the guise that they would be able to control me, since they had given me said promotion in an act of desperation. And we were all looking for really good jobs and money coming out of the pandemic. I think everyone can relate to the stress of it all, right? And I quickly figured out as she trash talked everyone I worked with that this person must be saying horrific things behind my back, but let's stay on the good side. I was pregnant and I was suffering a miscarriage, and she was aware and still had me sit next to her in a meeting instead of sending me home. And that was the moment that I knew I was in like a really dark situation. I went home and was actually blessed by chance to get pregnant right after. So I have a little rainbow baby. Her name is Cassandra. She's great. But I was pregnant, but the pregnancy was rough. My boss took to isolating me, saying derogatory things, even while pregnant. And I really just kept my head down because I wanted to save my job. And I had really great insurance. Like there was no way I was going to do anything, to try to like get me out of there. I went into preterm labor, unfortunately, though, at 27 weeks, dilated to 3 centimeters. While I was cleared to like go home, my work would not let me stop working necessarily. They were not going to help provide any resources with FMLA, anything like that. And said boss told me that instead of finding resources, that I should find a therapist because she wouldn't be it for me. As I was in pain and agony for all the way to 33 weeks, I did have one supervisor who took me seriously, but had to sneak me in and out of the building. So that was really hard to go through. And after I had my daughter safely, it got really ugly on the other side. I had to go back to work after 6 weeks due to changes in maternity leave policies and financial needs. And I found out that boss had been smear campaigning me the entire time I was on maternity leave and really trying to find a way to force me out. Because I had already reported her a couple times to HR for things, but she couldn't get rid of me because I was pregnant at the time. Instead took to gaslighting, extensive mobbing, extensive across the board, people telling me maybe it's your postpartum depression. And I hadn't actually developed it yet, by the way. It didn't come until after I was terminated, and my company, instead of firing me outright, offered me a transfer to another region completely. Which was not my home and not where my daughter was born, and I didn't want to be there. I said no, thank you. I left, came back to Michigan, went through a kind of a similar workplace abuse experience right on the back end. So I was able to actually identify what was kind of that case in particular that I went through in Connecticut and what was more systemic. So that actually ended up being helpful. But I had decided that was going to be the last time that I was going to be in this kind of environment and really got involved in advocacy. My daughter's great. She's healthy. My said abusive boss, I did do some exposing, but she is still there after serving. She only had a 6 month suspension. And I think she got a promotion after that. So
Background is in industrial organizational psychology. If people aren't aware of what that is, it's the study of behavior at work. But I went into a different area and ended up in marketing and sales, analytics in aerospace, um, about 7.5 years um, after I got my master's in the topic. And I would say that my workplace abuse story was more one of neglect and dysfunction rather than malicious intent. But it doesn't matter what the intent is, whether the people involved were meaning to cause chaos, chronic stress, and a toxic work environment. The impact on my body was the same. I relate to a lot of what other people have said. I was in the middle of jaw surgery, which is a highly invasive procedure, and the dysfunction at the working level that happened while I was in that job. I was on a multi-billion-dollar program, so really high dollar value, really high stakes, a lot of eyes watching. Um, People very high up at a Fortune 500 company had a very big interest in the program I was running, and the millions of dollars we were supposed to get ended up being hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we were still expected to execute the same plan that everyone had seen. And so the chaos of the job, the dysfunction of the job, for the first time in my life, in my early 30s, I couldn't perform anymore. And I got really curious about it. I started thinking back to what I'd learned in school, the degree I'd gotten pretty far away from, as I was now an expert in used aircraft parts with 2 psychology degrees. And got really curious about what creates these stress responses, PTSD responses in people at work in an office. And that was how I got really curious about the topic. I ended up going back to get my PhD to study it in more detail, because I really wanted to understand the things that, we read in the medical field, how The Body Keeps the Score, if people are familiar with that book, how those physiological impacts relate to everyday interpersonal stressors in the workplace. Graduated with my doctorate in 2022 and have been on an education campaign on the internet about what does this look like. I started to realize I had all this knowledge that wasn't common for people to understand. Having studied it throughout the pandemic, I started studying in 2018, so I got a PhD during the pandemic. And then there was an explosion in research in that time period that really kind of shined a light on how workplaces were a place of harm, and that everyone here has a different story but common experiences: mobbing, bullying, gaslighting, someone who's acting in ways that seem malicious without recourse. And so I called Deb one day, and that's how I got involved in advocacy. But that's my backstory and my abuse, is I was really curious about what was happening to me, and so I started studying it.